You have been sitting in that chair for 6 years. Every morning, the same cushion, the same corner of the same room. Every evening, 15 quiet minutes before bed. You have read the books, stacks of them, underlined twice in places, sentences copied by hand into a notebook by your bed. You know the words for patience. You know the words for letting go. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday, someone cuts you off in a parking lot. Or your grown son says something careless on the phone, landing exactly where it hurts. And it happens anyway. The heat rises before you've decided anything. Your voice gets sharp. For 4 or 5 seconds, you are simply, completely angry. The way you were angry decades ago, before any of the books, before any of the mornings on the cushion. The anger passes quickly. It almost always does. What comes after it does not. A heaviness settles in. A voice says, "After everything, after all those years, you're still this?" You go back over the moment in the parking lot, not looking at the other driver, looking at yourself. What do you call the thing that shows up right after the anger? The part of you that starts attacking the part of you that got angry? There was a man who asked almost the exact same question 2,500 years ago, with his feet bleeding on the ground. His name was Sona. Before he ever wore the robes of a monk, he had grown up in wealth. The kind of household where servants swept the garden paths smooth, because even his feet were known for being unusually delicate. He had one other thing from that old life, and it will matter more than it seems to at first. He had been trained since childhood to play the Veena, a stringed instrument with a long wooden neck, strings running its length, each one tuned by hand and by ear before it could make anything worth hearing. He knew, in his fingers, exactly what it felt like when those strings were right, and exactly what it felt like when they weren't. When Sona left home to follow the Buddha's teaching, he didn't do it halfway. He paced back and forth in walking meditation for hour after hour, refusing to sit even when his legs gave out, pushing his concentration until his mind felt like it might tear. He pushed so hard, for so long, that the delicate soles of his feet split open. Other monks began calling the place where he walked the bloody ground. And after all of that, more than most of us could sustain for a single week, he still hadn't found the peace he was searching for. If anything, he felt further from it. He began to think, quietly, that he simply wasn't capable of what the Buddha was pointing to, that it would be better to go home, use his family's wealth for good in some other way, and let go of a goal clearly beyond him. A man willing to bleed for his own awakening. Still coming up empty. Still concluding the fault was his own. The texts say the Buddha came to him that evening, aware of what Sona was carrying. Not with a teaching, not with a scripture, with a single question, drawn from Sona's own life, from long before any of this began. Before you were a monk, when you played the Veena, what happened to the sound when the strings were too tight? Sona answered without hesitation. The sound was bad. And when they were too loose? Also bad, he said. It was only when the strings were tuned, neither too tight nor too slack, set exactly to the pitch the instrument itself called for, that the Veena gave its true sound. That was the whole conversation. Sit with that for a moment before going further. The Buddha didn't explain the metaphor. He didn't need to. Sona already had, in his own hands, everything required to understand his own mind. What he'd been doing on the bloody ground wasn't wrong in some deep, spiritual sense. It was wrong the way an over-tightened string is wrong. Not a moral failure, a tuning problem. Ask yourself, before we name anything else, what has your own string sounded like? this past week. Here is what makes this teaching sharper than it first appears. Sona wasn't merely disciplined out on that bloody ground. He was at war. With his own restlessness, with every flicker of boredom, with every moment his attention slipped. He was using force against his own mind the way you'd use force against an enemy. There is a word in the old texts for that particular craving. The drive to force your way into a future state by sheer will, to destroy what currently is in order to replace it with what should be. The word is vibhavatanha, the craving for non-becoming, for the annihilation of the present moment in favor of an imagined better one. It sounds like discipline. It sounds like exactly what a serious practitioner is supposed to do. Try harder, resist the unwanted, root out the flaw. What it actually is, underneath that appearance, is a subtler form of the very grasping it claims to fight. You cannot use craving to extinguish craving, any more than Sona could use force to make his mind still. The tool and the target are made of the same material. This is the part so easy to miss, because it wears the costume of self-improvement. It isn't ordinary anger at your neighbor, or your knees, or the evening news. It's anger aimed at your own anger. You get frustrated at yourself for getting frustrated. Layer stacks on layer, and every layer feels justified, because it's dressed as trying to be better. Sona pacing on his bloody feet, a retired man silently furious with himself over a parking lot. Underneath the very different surface, the same motion. Both forcing an unwanted present into a more acceptable future through sheer pressure of will. Both, without realizing it, fighting a second war on top of a first one that was already over. Return to the Veena, still in Sona's hands, before any of this became a teaching. A string wound too tight doesn't reward the extra tension with a purer note. It goes flat and strangled first, then it snaps. Usually at the exact moment the pressure feels closest to complete. This is what happens when the mind is tightened by will alone. You clamp down on the anger the instant it appears. You clamp down again on the guilt that follows. Each turn of the peg is one more silent verdict. I should be past this by now. And like the string, something eventually gives. Not into peace, into exhaustion. Or a quiet despair that whispers, maybe I'm just not built for this. The very thought that nearly made Sona walk away on the bloody ground. More effort is not automatically better. Past a certain point, force stops refining the mind and starts damaging it. The math is not more equals better. There is a point, and past it, the same input produces the opposite of what you intended. It would be easy, hearing that, to swing the other way. To decide the answer is simply to stop trying. Let every string go slack. Treat every reaction as just how it is. Stop paying attention at all. The Veena makes this failure just as clear. A string too loose doesn't produce a gentler note. It produces no note, a dull buzz, or nothing. You can pluck it as many times as you like. Nothing coherent comes out. This is negligence, and it deserves to be named honestly, not romanticized as peaceful acceptance. Drifting through each day, never noticing the anger at all. That isn't the middle way. It's simply the opposite failure. Both failures share a root. Too tight is will forcing an outcome. Too loose is will abandoning the instrument altogether. Neither one is listening. Here's where the metaphor is easiest to misread, so it's worth being exact. The lesson isn't find the correct dose of self-improvement effort, some careful middle point between Sona's extreme and total laziness. That would still be vibhavatarha, just wearing a more moderate costume. What produces the true note is not more effort, and not less. It is a different relationship to effort entirely. A musician tuning a Veena isn't fighting the string. She isn't ignoring it either. She's listening, adjusting by feel, letting the string's own sound tell her what it needs. The tuning happens in response to the string's voice, not in spite of it. Translated back to the parking lot, the phone call with your son. Pure awareness isn't a stricter version of the inner drill sergeant currently attacking you for getting angry. It also isn't deciding your reactions don't matter. It's listening to the anger itself, exactly as it is, without a verdict stacked on top. The anger, heard clearly, is 5 seconds of heat. It's the self-attack afterward that turns those 5 seconds into 6 years of quiet exhaustion. There's a phrase for this, long used by teachers in this tradition. Be earnest, never grim. Earnestness is showing up, morning after morning, with real attention, the musician's careful ear. Grimness is the clenched jaw, the conviction that enough force can bend awakening to your schedule. One is presence. The other, however sincere, is still a fight. There's a reason force doesn't work here, and it's worth being precise about it, because the instinct to fight anger with more willpower feels so reasonable. Anger is already a kind of heat, a mind pushing against something it doesn't want. When you respond to that heat with more resistance, more inner force, more, I will not be this way, you're not applying water to a fire. You're applying more fire. The old teachers had a phrase for this, drung tung bin, the treatment that doubles the disease. A doctor who treats a fever by wrapping the patient in more blankets isn't helping. He's using the wrong tool for what he's looking at, mistaking the symptom for something that simply needs more pressure. This is why Sona's bleeding feet didn't produce the breakthrough he was working toward. It isn't that he lacked willpower. He had more of it than almost anyone. It's that willpower was never the right instrument for the job in front of him. You cannot outmuscle a mind into stillness the same way you can outmuscle a stubborn door into opening. A door yields to force because a door has no awareness of its own. A mind pushed hard enough doesn't yield. It tightens further, the way a string tightens further under the very peg trying to correct it. Hearing all this, it's easy to picture the opposite extreme. A shrug, a decision that nothing matters anymore, that every reaction is fine because the spiritual version of you no longer keeps score. That isn't what happened to Sona. After his conversation with the Buddha, he didn't stop practicing. He didn't decide discipline was the enemy. What changed was the tension itself. Not whether the string was there, but how it was held. Nobody is being asked to stop noticing a short temper in a parking lot. Noticing is the note the instrument makes. A musician who stopped listening to her instrument couldn't tune it even if she wanted to. The shift is smaller than either extreme. The moment you catch the anger, see if you can also catch the judge that shows up right behind it, already drafting its verdict, already reaching for the tuning peg to punish you with one more turn. You don't have to argue with that judge. You don't have to force it into silence. That would just be the same grip, wearing a new disguise. You simply see it. The way you'd notice a second person had quietly entered the room while you were still dealing with the first. Seen clearly, its grip usually loosens on its own. What does this look like for a person who isn't a monk pacing on bloody feet? Someone with a spouse to talk to at dinner? A car that needs its oil changed? A grandchild's recital this weekend? A phone that will ring again with that same son? Nobody is asking you to lower the bar on your own kindness. Nobody is asking you to excuse the sharp word in the parking lot. Maybe it isn't a parking lot for you. Maybe it's a sibling who still knows exactly which old wound to press at a family dinner, and you snap back before you've thought about it. Maybe it's a repair bill that comes in higher than promised, and the frustration comes out sideways at the person on the phone who didn't even set the price. Different rooms. Same 5 seconds of heat. Same second war. waiting to start the moment the heat fades, if you let it. Just this. The next time you catch yourself already frustrated with your own reaction, already turning the peg one more time against yourself, pause for a single breath before the self-criticism runs its full course. Not to stop it, just to notice it's there, the way you'd notice weather moving overhead. Present, real, not something you need to fight for it to pass. That single breath is the whole of what's being asked. Think back to the chair. 6 years of mornings. The same notebook by your side. The man sitting in it now is not fighting anymore. He is not trying to become someone who never gets angry, the way Sona once tried to force his way into stillness through unbroken effort. He has simply stopped adding a second war on top of the first one. Not a war won. A war that quietly became unnecessary. And here is the last thing worth saying about the Veena, the strings, the tuning peg, all of it. None of it was ever the point. A finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. However carefully Sona's teacher described the string, however precisely the tension was named, none of it was the thing itself. It was only a way of pointing. A raft built to cross one particular river. Once you're across, you don't carry the raft on your back for the rest of the journey. So take these words the same way. Don't hold on to the metaphor of the string. Don't hold on to the words war or tuning or even vibhavatarnha. Let them do their work and then let them go. There's a quiet irony worth noticing here, one Sona himself would likely have recognized. The very effort that once nearly broke him, pacing on bloody feet, gripping his own mind like an enemy to defeat, was, underneath the excess, the same sincerity that later let him hear a simple question about strings and understand it instantly. The sincerity was never the problem, only its shape was. Once the shape changed, from gripping to listening, the sincerity itself became the thing that carried him the rest of the way. Don't mistake this either. The raft is not something to resent for having been heavy on the way here. It did its work. It gets left at the riverbank, not thrown away in anger. What's true is not what's been said here. What's true is what you find yourself, in your own breath, your own next step, your own next thought. Held with the same gentle attention a musician gives a string she's simply listening to, not fighting. Your life is the only teacher that was ever going to finish this lesson. Peace was never the reward waiting at the end of the inner war. It was what was already there, in the instrument itself, the moment the hand on the tuning peg finally stopped turning and simply began to listen. May you find peace in the simplicity of being. Be well and stay awake.